Hello there. This is the Araucanian Resistance podcast, also known as Araucast Episode 3. I'm Beppe again, starting the episode, and I need to make some announcements first. I want to make some announcements first. One of them, uh, hopefully on the last episode the sound quality was better, particularly mine, because I finally learned how to use an equalizer for sound. It seems like my mic wasn't picking some higher frequencies good enough, and I managed to increase the gain for them and so on. So even at 35, uh, long after the beginning of my cognitive decline, which supposedly starts at 28, I'm still managing to learn something new almost every day. So that's a good thing. Something else on the episode notes. Since the beginning, I have been putting a link to our Matrix community that I've created them and I'm self-hosting. Matrix is a protocol for instant messaging, like I don't know, WhatsApp, Telegram, and so on. But you cannot, as I said, you can self-host it. I have my own server running here. It's not the most reliable, robust server ever, but it gives me some peace of mind knowing that I'm hosting my own content, at least for messaging. So if you're interested in joining, the link is there. I suggest that you create your account on a different server so that I don't have to host everything. But and that's okay because different instances can communicate between them. So it's a federation. So create your account on, I don't know, matrix.org. No, I don't recommend it, but if you wish to, or one of the many instances you have there, and then you can talk to us in our Matrix community. Okay, those are the announcements I wish to make. And once again, here I'm being joined by Emerald and Hermit. So to cut things short, good evening, guys, and thanks for being here once again.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you again for inviting me, and thank you, audience, for another episode.
Great. Okay, for this episode, we're going to talk about more about our background and especially about something that I believe we all share, we all have in common, which was some good experience with what could be called the Brazilian libertarian movement, or as I prefer to say, the Brazilian libertarian experiment, which has gone through, maybe that's pretentious to say, but I'd say it has already gone through its rise and fall. And I don't know, we're going to do not necessarily a post-mortem, but we'll analyze what's happening currently, if it has potential to come back, or it was just it's just fading away or not, and how we relate to them. To start this conversation, I'd like to ask Emerald to give his background with this move, to give his account of how this movement has began, because as far as I know, he was there. He was the one there who joined earlier. So if you could give us some key points on your journey.
Well, sure. First of all, I would like to. I hope all of you, had a great Christmas, and it was very good. And
Oh, thanks. Merry Christmas. A little bit late.
yes, it's the 28th, but I guess we can celebrate it until January 6th, I think, or 7th. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and well, regarding my libertarian journey, it as it happened to many of us, it started when I was a teenager, right? Um, when I met a friend in a gaming group, Facebook group, and well, we started talking, and he is a little older than me, and he introduced me to this more political kind of stuff. Not that I was completely ignorant about it, because um, Funnily enough, I read Orwell's 1984 for school when I was 14, and it intrigued me a lot. And I was always kind of a rebel in many ways in my family, which is a very conformist family in many ways. Very socialist. My entire family is socialist, like syndicalist almost. Well, not almost, literally. And there were many reasons for me to go to the exact opposite, right? And Facebook was the first platform to where these ideas really came to contact with a more wide audience. Before that, it was mostly forums on Orkut, right? Which I don't even know how to pronounce in English, as it is not talked about anywhere other than Brazil.
As far
um,
as I understand, Orkut was basically only popular in Brazil and Pakistan, and it's a
what an
Turkish word.
amazing, just great countries, right?
True.
And but I have to argue that it was better than Facebook in many ways because it was more like a forum. Whatever you thought would not spread to people who don't really care. So when your progressive priest tells you to spread your ideology, it wouldn't go as far, right? As it did on Facebook. But I didn't use Orkut for that long, to be honest. Actually, I don't think I used it at all. Like, I started using it, and then it everyone migrated to Facebook, and there, in the very beginning, Facebook was kind of um, very fertile for new debates and new ideas before all the Trump hysteria, and because of that, not only here in Brazil, but also in many other countries, ideologies which were more unknown or were more, um, let's say, taboo were being discussed. There's a book called The Revolt of the Public, which I'm almost finishing reading. It's very fortuitous that I started reading it a while ago. The author talks about how the information revolution made changes around the country, around the world. Sorry. So he talks about how the internet in the 2000s with the blogosphere made changes on Iran, on Egypt, on even Spain. And I think the same thing happened in Brazil because many ideas rose during the early 2000s mostly. Well, late to 2000s too, but not as much. And I was maybe lucky enough to see the rise of the libertarian movement from pretty much not the exact beginning because it goes way back, but as we know it now, the modern way, yeah, definitely. I saw like the MBL movement getting beginning to form. I saw the important people. I was actually, would you believe it if I said that I was an admin for a Facebook page called Liberalismo da Zoeira, which is where Kim Kataguiri got his platform.
I'm
Yeah,
pretty
this
pretty
happened.
confident.
Yeah, this happened, and well, this was back in 2014. We were in another world back then,
For people who
but
don't know, King Katagiri nowadays is one prominent politician, right? From ten prominent young politician. I'm not sure what office does he hold? Is he a deputy?
he's a congressman, a federal
Yeah, he's con.
congressman.
Yeah, I
But
I remember his early beginnings.
yes, he would record videos on his house talking about whatever. I think Ana Campagnolo also platformed him in the very beginning.
True.
Um, but we mentioned NBL in the previous movement, so yeah, that he's kind of a very important figure there. And yeah, this environment where people with small YouTube channels or small Facebook groups or pages, it was very fertile at the time, and it was something very new for most of us. And that's where I, fortunately or not, um, grew up in, and not grew up in because I was a teenager by then, but yeah, it influenced me for better or worse, for things that I like or for things that I dislike. But yeah, this started changing about 2016, around that, when Facebook started to censor people based on words they used, and they started taking very seriously when someone would report, right, the report system. And after that, I think the entire thing became, it slowly started to lose some gas, and eventually it just became like a try hard playground. People would just compete to see who was the most libertarian, or the most um, the one who was the most incendiary. Is that even a word, incendiary? The most
Inflammatory.
radical, inflammatory. Yeah, perfect. The most inflammatory, the most radical, and that was for me the beginning of the end. And that's when I started to get away from the movement in general. And I went through a very, I would say, nihilistic phase while I was in college, only for the pandemic to really, you know, make me more aware of how real things can get. And yes, that's kind of my journey. I don't know much about yours, but that's mine.
Okay, Hermit, could you what was your history with it?
Well, my history doesn't go back a long time because I didn't care much about politics until relatively recently. I would say I'm like only 10 years into politics. I would say before that I was relatively young. So around 2015 is when I started getting really interested in politics, and some context for those who are not from Brazil. During those years, from 2014 onwards, if I remember correctly, uh, no, yeah, from 2014 onwards, we were under the Dilma presidency, which was the first woman president of Brazil, and she was widely unpopular, and it was very easy to see how unpopular she was. So it was kind of a cultural phenomena because when you are growing up, you are accustomed to a stable regime. So while I was growing up, I was accustomed to the idea that people like their government. So when Dilma came to power and basically everybody hated her, it was a kind of a generational awakening of sorts, a kind of a shock event, and it kind of got me started into politics. So it's an important background because I think the second, especially the second Dilma presidency, starting from 2014, is basically the root of all modern Brazilian movements, which stems from this vacuum of legitimacy which we are trying to fill ever since. So around 2015, I start getting interested into politics, and I'm not that into politics, but I'm at least starting to be aware of it. And as you guys said, the probably the main culprit for that is probably the MBL, or the Free Brazil movement, which were guys of around our age, and I think that's what resonated with us the most, is that they were young guys doing politics. And you have that stereotype that politics is for old guys in their wheelchair and their gray beard. But suddenly, talking about politics became a youth issue. You had youth protests. You had some big youth protests, and during the Dilma protest, which eventually got the impeachment of her disposal, if I remember correctly, they were in the front. They were in the lead, so they got a lot of spotlight. And those liberal ideas, which were largely hidden, or at least in my younger years, came to the forefront, and it became readily accessible for especially youth. So I started to get interested, especially in liberal politics and economics. Uh, then the years go on, and eventually 2017 rolls around, and that's where I think the big political awakening starts, where you have this kind of build up to the eventual Bolsonaro presidency. And 2017 was a big year for the start of this push, especially on the internet, of this political consciousness. And at the time, there was a lot of focus on the more liberal aspects of things, not as much as the libertarian. But we had started, or at least I had started, hearing whispers of some names like Hayek and Mises, which eventually would grow a lot more important. But at the time, we were still on that old notion of liberal politics with Thatcher, Reagan, and Friedman, what you could call the sort of new liberal movement. So eventually, in 2018, Bolsonaro does in fact get elected, and uh, one thing I remember very vividly from that instant is that Bolsonaro allied himself a lot with the libertarian and liberal movement. He indeed. I think there is a photo with him with the. I think it's Anatomy of State or Democracy: The God That Failed. I know he was in touch and at least followed, and was followed back by the Rothbard Institute here in Brazil. So there was a lot of dialogue there. But eventually, uh, I would say around 2018 to 2019 and 2020, it was the big heyday of libertarianism, and especially of anarcho-capitalism, which was something quite unheard of for a time. We all were on the liberal boat, the neoliberal, libertarian. But this new thing called anarcho-capitalism came around, and it had a solid ideological basis, which for someone who was not exposed to a lot of ideology, you get exposed to the liberal and communist and socialist ideologies, which are kind of mainstream, kind of incorporated into normal discussions. But I think the biggest shock of being actually presented with a well articulated ideology came from anarcho-capitalism, and I was drawn into the movement. I was uh, reading reading a lot of articles from Mises, from Rothbard. I got into reading the books from these authors, and I got pretty deep into them, Hoppe, Menger, and etc. And it was a big time for me. I think one of the greatest shifts, uh, kind of what Emerald talked about, was the switch from social media. I think a lot of liberal discourse and libertarian politics was kind of relegated to Facebook, but once I switched to Twitter, I was exposed a lot more to anarcho-capitalists. Uh, Another thing I cannot fail to mention is the influence of YouTube. Uh, uh, MBL had a large presence on YouTube, and it was, I think, was through them that I discovered Rafael Lima, which is someone which we will probably talk a lot more on this episode, and that's probably how I got into libertarianism. And then we can later talk about how I fell off from it, or I moved on, or what I would actually say kind of took the necessary lessons from it. So that's how I got into libertarianism.
Sure. You mentioned 2014. Oh, go on. Go ahead.
I would just like to remind you that back in, I think, 2013, um, Mises, the Brazilian Mises Institute, was already making very important moves, even internationally. If you guys remember, they brought Stephen Molyneux to debate local communist philosopher, which was, by the way, amazing. I highly suggest. And there was a sentiment of, oh, this thing is growing at the time.
Yeah, even Hans Hoppe and Tom Woods had given lectures at the Mises Institute, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Brazil,
Yeah,
I don't know Hoppa, but Tom Woods, I'm pretty sure he did, and also Ron Paul, but not Hoppa.
I remember them being here, but I'm not sure if they gave lectures.
Yes, that's true.
Oh, anyways, Hermit mentions 2014. I have very clear in my mind because it relates very closely to my journey. That on 2010 there was that cover for the Economist magazine showing Christ the Redeemer launching like a rocket. Brazil was the country of the future once again because the stability, political stability, and discovery of new oil fields, and everybody was thinking, oh, there will be a lot of money to invest in the industry, in education, and so on. We'll need a lots of engineers, and that was an era where many there was a rise in engineer courses, and I'm an engineer uh, by I entered an engineer course as well. Not necessarily because of this movement, not necessarily because of this expectation, but because I liked that stuff. But it coincided with this moment. And in 2014, now that most of those expectations were gone, there's the another cover for the Economist magazine where the Christ the Redeemer was like a failing rocket. Right? It was spinning in the air and falling to the ground. So there was a lot of frustration entering the second Dilma term, and as you guys mentioned, the most of the right wing, so-called right wing movements in Brazil, modern right wing movements, stemmed from this anti-workers' party sentiment because people were really frustrated by the state of things. Okay, so if allow me, I want to talk about my journey, which is a bit longer because I'm older as well. But you see that I'm kind of a late bloomer, intellectually speaking, or late decayer, if you prefer. If I'm being completely honest, to be completely honest, I think the way my mind started changing was because of a broken heart. During my teenage years, when I was at school, I was, man, I'm thinking now, I look at a lot like certain Zoomers today because I was super autistic and I had this map book in school. I book many kinds of maps of the world and geography and political maps and physical maps and so on. And I spent hours looking at those maps and planning. Oh, if I was a dictator, how could I invade this country and this country? What could I do? There's those weak points here and there, and I was writing over those maps over and over. I was super I was super confident that I could be this good ruler that would, I don't know, conquer the world. I swear to God that's true. Because I had this deep down, this idea that I was a good person and I could improve things. I could change the world for the best. And I think what my most catastrophic failure with women revealed to me uh, during that time a little later that I was able to be a dick because I was a dick to that girl. I'm not sugarcoating it. When I look back, wow, I was such an idiot. And that changed something in my mind. I started realizing that, okay, I'm not as good as I think I am. I can screw up pretty badly. And maybe that's maybe that's self-serving, but I have this belief that maturity starts with some kind of self-fear, fear of yourself, because you start looking at your failures, at your vices, and if you cannot, maybe realize you cannot correct them, and then you start hoping that you don't have as much power as you hoped before. So that stayed pretty stagnant during college years, but things start changing again when during the last year in engineering, uh, where I have studied, you needed to do some internship. So I started working for a local company and being more in touch with different people who are not just young university students. I have started realizing that uh, I didn't really know what most people want for their lives. People had I was thinking about, oh, I'll become a graduate student, I'll do my masters and my PhD and so on. And there was that guy in the same company that worked at that production line who was just thinking about building a house for his girl because he wanted her to be safe. And I was thinking, I never thought about it. Maybe this guy is living much more in a real world than I am, because university is a bubble, and most people inside the bubble cannot realize it as much as they think they're smart. So those things started messing with my mind. I was being more and more skeptical about our ability, our individual ability to solve stuff, and that's the moment where I was hit by the start of some new conservative movement in Brazil. People were talking a lot of British conservatism and so on. That idea of containment of power, of prudence, of uh, not changing things too quickly, not being too pretentious of your changes. Those anti-revolutionary way of thinking, and that really resonated with me. I was drawn by it. Was at that time that I started learning about Olavo de Carvalho, which has been cited here quite a few times and will probably be many more. And those things fascinated me. Okay, there are people saying things that resonate with that feeling I had of not being too pretentious with power. But the problem is that kind of discourse, uh, from most people, not from Olavo because he's much more insightful, but from most people, from most influencers at the time, it got tiring pretty quickly because it offered nothing besides containment, right? It offered nothing besides this prudent approach to stuff, but it didn't solve problems. I understand that a tradition, a system of government that you don't have a explicit reason to get rid of, it's it's generally not worth getting rid of. But sometimes you have a reason to get rid of stuff, and conservatives won't recognize it. So more and more, I was also getting in touch with those uh, libertarian influencers, so to speak. Rafael Lima, as already cited, some others more obscure, but also pretty vocal. And then I started realizing, okay, there are some things that we need to get rid of, and the conservative prudence ends up being kind of an antidote to necessary change, because they're so fearful of changing things that they probably wouldn't want to get rid of slavery if slavery was an actual thing nowadays. Because we don't know the consequences of getting rid of it. It became some kind of antidote to actual useful change. So I started paying more attention to those guys and getting more in touch with authors like Rothbard and Mises and so on, as you have guys have mentioned, One book that really struck me was The Ethics of Liberty by Murray Rothbard, because of how simple it is in a way. Because the way he argues, the way he shows his ethical framework, it's based on very down to earth things. Saying, oh, this guy is not hiding his ideas behind complex language. He's starting from the basics. He's starting from the guy in the island. And that really struck me. Okay, we can't build this intellectual edifice to justify the things we consider right and wrong, uh, and we don't need to hide it behind overly complex language. So I was really drawn to it. And but I was getting really late to the party. Those are the This is like 2017. We are on the cusp of Bolsonaro's election, and there was a big hope, right, that he would bring about those free market ideas and so on. But as any big tent coalition, as happened with Trump, there's a many interests, many conflicting interests there. Because Bolsonaro was never a free marketeer, was never a classical liberal quote unquote guy, but he had a veneer of it to please a certain audience. He had some people in his team who were more inclined to it, but it was never a something he really believed in. So he ended up collapsing pretty quickly because the reality of politics did it as always. So and then but I kept being more on the libertarian side because honestly most of the counter arguments were pretty bad. Talking about conservatism, something that always made me very angry was the condescendency, is that the proper word, of some authors. I tried reading Russell Kirk, which is considered a big name in American conservatism, and the guy is super condescending in his chapter about libertarians. I hate when people say, no, you don't really, that's not really your argument. Let me make your argument for you, and then I show that I can offer you a better solution. He doesn't take people for the word. He will say, oh no, you don't really need that. What you really is what I'm selling here. It's Go on,
Kathy
go ahead.
Newman. So what you're saying is,
Basically that is it's the it's the impression I get from, what's the name of the guy, the big obese guy from Chesterton, which people tend to abuse nowadays, abuses their quotes nowadays, mainly on the more traditionalist right wing community or something. But I sense from him this same level of smug, of condescending tone that never takes people for their word. Always trying to psychologize and look for uh, hidden intentions and so on. Is pretty infuriating. But over time, the same way, things that kept me on libertarianism was the opposition. Things that made me go away, not necessarily move away, but stop associating with this idea, was libertarians themselves, because they were becoming pretty mimetic and too attached to catchphrases and so on that wasn't dealing with the situation at hand. So I think some of them who actually believed those ideas and became disillusioned, ended up leaving or becoming more low profile, and the other guys ended up becoming more grifters for the current regime, the Bolsonaro term, and so on. So it was pretty blackpilling. COVID was another pretty big hit because all those expectations that, oh, deep down, some influencers were saying it, and I don't blame them back then. Say that hope that, oh, deep down everybody's a libertarian if we can only explain those ideas to them, they will agree because most people want to be peaceful and so on. But when you had COVID and people denouncing their neighbors for nothing burgers, that shows this is not really true, at least not here. And the thing that really put the nail in the coffin um, for libertarianism as a Brazilian movement for me was the Ukraine war. Maybe most people don't care, and here don't care, and I don't believe people have to care. But I have a personal attachment to Ukraine. Not that I am a descendant of Ukrainian migrants, but I have grown up. I have been born and grown up in a city which had a substantial Ukrainian community. I have studied in a school that was tied to a Ukrainian Catholic church. So I had this uh, I have this great attachment to this, I don't know, this culture. And when I see the war exploding and see not only Brazilian libertarians but American libertarians, foreign libertarians in general, and Brazilian by extension, because we don't produce um, much lot of new stuff. We're basically just parroting. Being completely psyoped by Russian propaganda and this anti-American mentality that everything that associated with America is bad because America is bad, and saying that, oh, I'm anti-war, but at the same time almost hoping that Ukraine collapses and be overrun by the Russian military machine because somehow everything's preferable to an American allied country. That really showed me, okay, those guys are a bunch of idiots. We are even, uh, and look, I still have a lot of respect for the writers and so on. As I said, the Ethics of Liberty is for me still a great book. I love referencing it. I love deriving conclusions from it. But as a community, libertarianism, this is a hard word to say in English, is a bunch of fools. It's a bunch of idiots. Um, Apart from this, there's also the Bitcoin grift that took a lot of people as well, and showed how much people don't care for truth. They just care about slogans and making money. So it was pretty disheartening all that process. But I I I do not associate the libertarian label nowadays, most because of the community, because I truly respect most of a lot of the ideas. I just don't think they provides answers to uh, all aspects of life, and also it doesn't pretend to offer those answers. But many people ended up expecting this, right? People don't like holding two or three ideas in their mind. They want a single catchphrase, a single mantra to solve all the problems, and that will never work. Sorry for the long history here. Uh, okay, go ahead.
Well, about the libertarians, right? The people. Well, I think the stereotype of autistic screeching among the libertarian community is true pretty much everywhere. I think the ideology itself kind of attracts people who tend to be more abstract in their thinking
It's for
and take
outliers, right?
exactly. And the problem is that in Brazil, people are. I think a lot of it has to do with the culture of just taking advantage or of trends and things like that. So when you try to take principles and adapt to this culture, it becomes something very opportunistic. Yes, you are a libertarian, but you are also a Bitcoin maximalist and end up being a
Not only
Marxist.
that, they'll try to reduce libertarianism to Bitcoin in this case. It's
Yes,
this
yes.
reductionism that makes everything ideological. In my mind, ideology, it tends to be this idea of finding the key of the universe, right? You take this one principle, the only thing you can hold on your mind because your brain is really small, and you try to apply it to every single problem in the world.
That's what happens when you combine libertarian autism with, well, stupidity. That's it. I mean, let's be real. People in Brazil aren't particularly smart.
Well, I'm tempted to say all this process was a Brazilian issue, but to be honest, where in the world we have a strong libertarian movement? Even in America, what's the only positive case for it, you can see a lot of people getting pretty stupid because of being psyopted to death. Even people I respect, like I don't know, Tom Woods. I have watched a lot of episodes from the Tom Woods show. The guy was bringing in one trick pony Scott Horton every week, and also that fat whale communist Caitlyn Johnston, who is basically an America bad screeching woman.
Or worse, Rechtenwald. But yes, I see what you mean. But yes, the American libertarian movement is co-opted by the most um, conspiracy-oriented people. But what I wanted to say is, you mentioned something about COVID, right? During COVID, as I said in the beginning, it was the moment that I understood that, well, politics is very much real. It's not merely a blur. And it really reminds me of that H.L. Mencken quote that Michael Malice loves. The average man doesn't want to be free. He merely wants to be safe. So yeah, no one wants to, no one is deep down a libertarian, like you mentioned. And COVID broke this idea of the most optimist, or I'd rather say naive libertarians, such as Rafael Lima. And during COVID, actually, is when I saw in action the concept of the cathedral by Moldbug, right? And it was very interesting to see how the policies were being dictated by, at the same time, the media and the universities, and it was always the most questionable professionals ever, here as in America, here as in Europe, here as in Europe, except for Sweden, right? But anyway, COVID was hell. COVID was hell for me. It was awful. And seeing how these things that were abstract ideas until a few months prior being used as um, explaining very well what was happening in the world was a big shock for me. And I think for many people. You see that the discourse has become way more negative nowadays.
True. Um, Hermit, any considerations, any points?
No, I think I just wanted to explore more of this idea of these ages of the libertarian movement. Because for me, 2017 to 2019, you could argue also for you could argue also for 2016 to 2020 to some extent was kind of this golden age of the Brazilian libertarian movement, and especially I think it was the big dawn of the ANCAP movement here, of the anarcho-capitalist movement, and that's where I had the fondest memories, and the I think it was the high point of it, because there was a lot of kind of uh, trying to bring to light some of these great authors that we have mentioned here. There, and I felt like it was a very intellectually friendly movement. So you had someone like Rafael Lima, which, for all the mistakes that he may have committed, or his shortcomings, he was before everyone else doing lectures and read-alongs of dance theory stuff on YouTube for free. So I think it was Ethics or Liberty, or some of those Rothbard books, which he has a video of an hour plus for every chapter, and that's crazy to think about, because I have never seen something like that. especially for an ideology. So during this time, I felt like the libertarian movement could only go forward, and so that's why I became an ANCAP, and that's where I think the sort of golden age of the movement was. Uh, there was a lot of hope, I think, for the movement. We had people like Paulo Cogos, which uh, has a lot of flaws too, but he pretty much managed to go mainstream out of some crazy stunts, but he did. We also had people like Alexandre Porto and Foer, which were more on the intellectual side, but uh, I felt like during those golden years from 2016 to 2020, you could basically log on YouTube and be fed a constant stream of maybe 6 to 8 videos from libertarian channels every day. And it genuinely felt like you were part of something, of a community of sorts. And eventually that broke down. We can get to it later, but I think though those golden years, as I would like to call it, are something we should talk about.
That's true. Yeah, I have fond memories of that time as well because, as you say, there was a lot of very prolific people making videos, making articles, writing articles, and so on. And even when you join the groups, the discussion groups, the communities, there's a lot of debate and back and forth, even even fights around very tiny disagreements or different understandings of the theory. But I miss those times. Recently, I have interviewed for one of the guys you mentioned, and I was talking to him this. I miss the autism, the intellectual autism of those times, because people are even start feeling stimulated to read Kant and Aristotle and Saint Thomas just to understand the fundamentals of that stuff. Because there's the epistemological difference between, I don't know, Mises and Rothbard, because one of them is a neo-Kantian, the other one is a you can say a new Aristotelian or a new Thomist, and people are going really down the rabbit hole. So very uh, intellectually stimulating times. I miss those times, and I really wonder when exactly that broke down, because uh, there's no obvious reason for that ending, other than people just losing interest. But I'm not really sure what was the turning point.
I think it was doomed from the beginning, to be honest, because there is no intellectual tradition in Brazil that is anywhere close the libertarian ideology. We didn't have big libertarian thinkers. Well, to be honest, we didn't have many thinkers in general, but there's no continuity, I think. We didn't have even libertarian authors or famous people in general. We didn't have an Ayn Rand. We didn't have like any libertarian influencing politics as Rothbard did with Pat Buchanan. Yeah, so it's not in the culture. It's very hostile to the culture, actually. And at the end of the day, people are going to, well, they don't want to be free, dude. They want to feel safe.
Oh, I understand it's never taking root as a big movement because it's not very compatible with the Brazilian psyche. But I I would be hopeful for a permanent think tank, so to speak. But even that wasn't able to hold, and maybe that's scope. But I could bet there was some kind of sabotaging going on there because I remember when we were at the peak. I was part of some uh, secessionist movements as well. Because one of the other reasons that I have approached libertarianism is that, well, as a southerner here in Brazil, we have this. I can maybe I cannot say tradition, but we have in our mind, in our mentality, in our psyche, that desire of being independent, being an independent country, and the only ideology I can say that provided some intellectual some intellectual backing to it was libertarianism. So there was that as well. And I was involved with some secessionist movements at the time. And what became clear to me is that, well, Southern Brazil is not the culturally most important region of the country, right? From the Brazilian culture, quote unquote, perspective, the most important region is the southeast and the northeast, mainly the southeast nowadays. And I started seeing a lot of hostility from the OGs, libertarian OGs from those regions, against people trying to create their own movement here in the south. So as you mentioned, some new influencers appeared basically as anti Force, as anti Rafael Limas, and so on. And to this day, they're only surfing on. Uh, they keep doing the polemist stuff, and they're probably even admittedly they're agorists, right? It's a different branch, and during a different branch of political ideology, more like some left and leaning style of libertarianism. And during a lot of time, they were trying to psyop people. They were trying to uh, being seen as part of the same movement, and that happens even in the U.S. Like I feel it was like Saudi agorist was trying to say sell his movement as that's anarcho-capitalism 2.0, join us, and those guys are doing that here as well. So I see there was a lot of sabotaging. A lot of people were appearing to throw. Not sure what's the proper term to use, but they were trying to throw a wrench at the gears in the gears of this rising movement, and ended up succeeding in doing so because so much confusion has been seed that people ended up vanishing and being disheartened by those developments. So maybe that's cope on my side, but I have seen that happening to some extent.
Well, what I think happened, it's of course a mix of things. One of the main causes I think for the decline is that first of all, people just got too complacent. In which I say, and you will probably recognize this, is that people really felt like libertarianism had all the answers. So this movement that people just begin shouting their mantras. They think they're undefeatable, and that's the end of any type of philosophical engagement. When we were coming into libertarianism, it was this exciting new thing which we were constantly checking our knowledge of economics or philosophy or politics or whatever. But after some time, when you keep hearing the same arguments, you keep hearing the same mantras of taxation is theft. At the end of the day, you're gonna end up thinking that's all there is. You don't have to study any more of it. You just have to apply it now. So the whole movement just decided to go on to praxis, and kind of ignore its intellectual aspect. And much of it was sold under this idea that Hoppe's argumentation ethics was this silver bullet that solved all philosophical issues. And so discussing anything philosophical was basically seen as useless because libertarianism had already solved philosophy. Everything is just uh, debate and praxis. So, and I was there on the ground army, so to speak, and I distinctly remember people were just talking. We need to develop libertarian culture. We need to develop libertarian art, and we need to focus on debate because any intellectual kind of work like writing books or articles is functionally useless now that libertarianism has just been solved by Hoppe's argumentation ethics. And the monetary issue was of course solved by Bitcoin, and the economic issue had been solved by the Austrian school years ago. So I think there's a lot of that killed the intellectual movement, and and to the death blow, I think really was COVID. Not in the sense that libertarianism didn't have an intellectual response to what governments under COVID were doing, but I think the great demoralization came when all those sound arguments kind of became nothing in the face of power. And I think that's where a lot of people got, kind of Yarvin pilled and got kind of kicked in the teeth by Yarvin because they realized a lot of their arguments weren't worth anything because at the end of the day, the people were just doing what they want. The governments were kind of doing what they wanted, and there was and the NCAP militias were not coming to the rescue, and the agorists were not organizing parallel societies, and there was no great successionist rising. And at the end of the day, people were just left alone, thinking, "What are these arguments gonna give me now?" I thought we were the undefeatable, inevitable movement that was gonna sweep out all the governments from the face of the earth. So I think there was a great disappointment and a great demoralization there.
I think you're spot on. Yeah, there's a lot of hope, that a lot of uh, arrogance from most people, as you said. Oh, we have the solution for everything, and there is this problem that I have mentioned about the idealization. Ideologization. When you take a single thing, a single answer that might very well be true, but you try to turn this into this all-encompassing principle that will solve everything, that will answer everything, and it becomes super out of touch. You are not able to speak to regular people that way because they are dealing with different problems, different issues, and you're not communicating to them. And there's also the hope we had with, as we mentioned, with the Bolsonaro term, because even if he was not a pre-marketeer, he's seemed like a pretty pro-gun man, but by the standards of Brazilian governments, and also had his Minister of Economy, which was like a Chicago style economy. So there is all this hope that, oh, we'll have a freer country with gun access and so on. And a lot of that was screwed by COVID, right? Many changes have to be made, many policies have to be changed because it was an emergency. So all those expectations were destroyed by some state of emergency where most of the theory didn't matter to the huge majority of people. Even some libertarians, they ended up being disheartened. It reached the point of, yeah, it was demoralized. That's the proper term you used. Emerald, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I agree, and COVID even changed my perspective on things. As I mentioned, it was the first time that I saw the cathedral in operation in real time. I knew Yarving a little bit back then, but it's way different to read something and to see it with your own eyes. And COVID definitely Yarvin pilled me in many ways. I remember Dark Enlightenment first appeared to me, I think, in 2016 or 13, I think, and I didn't give too much attention to it. First of all, because Nick Land is autistic, and second of all, because while some things were interesting, I didn't see it happening, you know. But COVID changed all of that. But I still think that the movement was doomed from the beginning because a lot of the Brazilian um, this is not just confined to mainstream politics, but a lot of Brazilian way of seeing politics in general is based on the Workers' Party. We much of the opposition is well, it is defined by being an opposition, as Beppe often mentions. And I remember reading Fabio Osterman. Do you remember this guy?
Yes, I do.
Um, he once mentioned something very I don't like him. I think he's I can't say exactly these words that I'm thinking, but I think he's all of that. And he once mentioned that people forget how despairing was the popular support towards the Workers' Party. Even after the first election, where there was a crisis, the Mensalon, right, which was a big corruption scandal. Even after that, their approval rating was like almost 90% or even more. I'm not sure. So if ever, uh, e- it was always based on, you know, it's all or nothing. It's now or never. So they would make allegiances with people who they shouldn't be talking to, or maybe they wouldn't go through their ideas, and these power things would eventually these power disputes would eventually come. I think it was doomed from the beginning. I really don't see how it could be otherwise nowadays. Maybe with something organized like MBL seems to be trying to do, but I highly doubt it. But until then, I see no other way. I don't see a Milei appearing in Brazil. Also, Milei was a big shock to people because um, Argentina was always the fucked country. They were always always fucked up. We would joke about going to Argentina and buying wine for like 5 reais or something, which is very cheap. But in a few years, they are kicking our asses, aren't they? I mean, uh, and that changed a lot of the libertarian perspective too. So they're now not as allergic to politics as they used to be. But I don't know where that's going.
Yeah, as you have mentioned, to something that is defined by opposition to something else doesn't really exist, right? Once that something else vanishes, the the thing that is opposition vanishes as well, and that happens a lot. Yeah, a lot of those uh right generally right wing movements stem from anti Workers Party. When Workers Party, it doesn't, it haven't faded really, but now that is not the main concern, or the only concern. Those opposition movements have faded as well. That's true. Uh, some other thing, maybe that's particular to me as well. It's related to the Ukraine question. That made me very disillusioned with the libertarian movement is how much. Maybe that's a Brazilian issue, especially. Is how people lack a sense of identity, and I don't know, this it showed, it really revealed uh the problems of focusing only on libertarian or even liberal ideas, that we started seeing people as interchangeable, and that really made me, I don't know, I lost a lot of enthusiasm with that crowd. Something else I was thinking, um yeah, I know it's forbidden to to mention the guy here, but there was a Schwerpunkt argument that lives rent free in my mind to this day. You guys know Tolkien, right? There's this
Sure.
there's this concept that he applies to the Lord of the Rings, as far as I know, called the Eel tragedy, which is the positive tragedy. You look at all the characters trying to destroy the ring, and all of them fail uh, in a certain point, right? Their success is never complete. They contribute to the journey in order to get the ring to the, I don't know, to the mouth of the volcano. I'm not super familiar with the story, but But in the end, none of them manages to destroy it actively. They need it happen. What happens is that uh, Gollum falls somehow. He trips and falls. Is that right? And it's
In
Yeah.
the movies, yes.
oh, okay. Okay, I'm talking mostly about the movie, but the what happens in the book? You guys know?
No idea.
Okay. Looking at the movie, I'm assuming it reproduces the book well enough. So it happens. What happens is this moment of divine providence, let's say, that saves the day. Everybody contributes to make that to to bring about the situation, but in the end, what solves the problem is something that's outside the power of everybody there. And what that reveals, and even some correspondence by Tolkien as well, when he says he's some kind of anarchist or something, reveals this idea that our power held by people will never solve anything. This idea that we can never solve things with our power. We always have to hope for some divine providence for that will solve the issues. We'll do our part, okay, but I always have that idea. Oh, it has to be a small part because you can't do much more than that. And if you take this to the extreme, neither I nor Schwarpunk were accusing Tolkien of this, but if you take this idea to extreme, and I've seen many libertarians doing that, uh, you end up some kind of gnosis, some kind of dualistic heresy, where you say, "Oh, I need to avoid power at all costs because power is bad." Is the Lord Acton quote, right? The power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But deep down, that reveals some idea that you can live a pure life in this world. If you if you get rid of power, if you run away from power as much as possible, you can live this perfect pure life in this world where you won't be tainted by power. And assuming that you can have actions that are morally perfect, that's not true. Regardless of if you're wielding power or not, your actions will never be perfect because you're a fallen creature. So why not use power to the best of your abilities to solve issues without the expectation that you do everything, but without this cowardice of giving up power to feel better about yourself. So that really stuck to me, to be honest. Not sure what you think about it.
Well, I can see a lot of vanity on it, and I saw a lot of vanity on the libertarian movement as well, because we had a kind of a faction, you could call it, called the purists, and we are not assigning this name to them; they call it themselves.
True.
So there was a lot of pride and ego on being a pure libertarian, and that's the part where we usually call the autistic arguing, but was a lot of ego between in the libertarian movement, and of course in every movement you are going to find it,
Yeah.
but you combine it with an individualistic ideology and a kind of culture of or political culture of, the markets is gonna solve this. Don't worry, guys. The company's got it. The market's gonna solve it. We just gotta wait for the inevitable collapse of the state. Bitcoin's gonna collapse the state. And so you got a lot of complacency and a lot of vanity. I'm not gonna get involved in politics. I'm going to taint myself. I'm going to become a statist, a pro-government libertarian, a contradiction. So I'm gonna stay here, being a purist. Buying Bitcoin once every month, and I'm gonna say, okay, job's done. I don't need to do anything. I don't even need to think about it intellectually or engage with it intellectually because it's already solved. There is literally nothing I can do to make libertarianism more better.
And the
So a lot of this happened, I think.
Yeah, and the ironic thing is, even when the solution comes, the market solution, quote unquote, comes, many people ended up rejecting it because it's not hardcore enough. We mentioned a lot Rafael Lima here, and he's not perfect, and No. And I stopped following a lot of his content just because I became saturated with this. It was repeating himself a lot, but because he was educating new audience, I don't blame him for that. But to be honest, he wasn't one of the most normal guys in this community. And I have this feeling that a lot of people ended up rejecting him because he wasn't matching the stereotype of the subversive man, right? People, there's a problem with being with a movement made by those outliers. They have this contrarian mindset, this subversive, by the sake of subversion mindset, that when they see something that looks too clean, they immediately reject it because you need to have a guy wearing the Guy Fawkes mask and burning buildings and so on to be a hardcore guy. There's a law of that's a more widespread thing in Brazil. Even in other movements, when you see someone reaching a a good intellectual point, they can't help themselves in turning it more vulgar just for the sake of making it sounding more uh, popular, making it more representative of the common people and so on. There's a problem. People truly hate what appears to be respectable because maybe they associate this with politicians and so on, but that's not a sustainable way of thinking. That ends up being even anti-civilizational if you take it to the extreme. I've seen a lot of these people crave for this subversion aesthetic, which is truly destructive.
I think it is kind of poetic in a sense, because Rafael Lima, his channel name is Ideias Radicais, which translates to radical ideas. And the thing that happens is that when you found an ideology, and he didn't found it, but he was the probably the biggest spokesperson for libertarian ideology, is that
And even
the
some of
thing that
those subversive guys would screech at this statement, right? No, he's not the first. He was stealing
yeah,
from the
yeah.
true ones, the OGs.
The
Right?
Moderate Ideas channel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's where I'm getting at. His channel is radical ideas, but the thing about ideology is, as Zizek would put it, ideology is a drug. So the more you try it, the more you want to be, the more radical you want to be. So eventually, people outgrew him. They started trying to be more radical than the radical ideas guy. So he started sounding more and more unreasonable, but he was basically staying in the same place he always was. It's just that, you have this new wave of people who just got into a movement who claims to have all the answers, and they are trying to push it to the limit, and they are now kicking kicking the face of the people who actually built it, and who actually put in the effort to try to uh, make something actually positive.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that, I feel.
I remember that people associating him a lot with Jeffrey Tucker and shitting on Jeffrey Tucker a lot as well because of some low points. He had that episode of Richard Spencer. At times, Richard Spencer was a moron. Nowadays, I think he's pretty good on the Ukraine question, but at that time, he was kind of a moron. And and it was pretty unfair because Jeffrey Tucker was super solid on COVID. And just people just forget. People just learn to hate him. Oh, look, he use those butterfly how to say ties and all that. Oh, look how clean he looks. He's a
Bow
he,
tie.
yeah, he's a lawbird. It's a bow tie. Thanks. He's a lawbird, and people start shitting on him because and start cheating on Rafael as well as the same kind of people, as the same kind of lawbirds that needs to be destroyed because we need to be throwing people from helicopters. It's interesting. People have this presumption of a power that not they don't nearly have. Man, you won't be able to throw communists from helicopters. Calm down. You're not that much of a badass.
An hypothesis I have, and I don't know if you guys agree, is that a lot of so-called political movements from the right, I feel, are kind of cannibalizing itself, in the sense that a lot of libertarianism was an outgrowth of people coming from and disillusioned with other right-wing ideologies, or so-called right-wing ideologies, like classical liberalism. You would hear a lot when you were in the libertarian movement about where people came from, and they would usually say a classical liberal or a classic conservatism background. You didn't hear a lot of leftists, quote unquote, converting. There were some cases, but they were not the majority. And I think what happened is after libertarianism got demoralized, a lot of other movements started cannibalizing it. And so I think if you would look more closely, you would find that a lot of groypers, a lot of MAGA people were probably recently libertarians and probably moved on as soon as the movement lost morale. And that's probably something that's natural to political ideologies and movements, but that's interesting to point out nonetheless.
Yeah, that's a lot of frustration involved. Just a minute, Emerald. Uh, I remember seeing this case of a guy. It always happens the most emotional guys. The guy who was almost leaking Hoppa and Rothbard and the guys from the libertarian community in Brazil saying, "Oh, how great they are! Oh, they have gave me a follow on Twitter and so on." The dude was melting down with joy and all that, and I remember him like 6 months later, basically bashing those guys nonstop, saying how much they suck and all that. You see, always the most emotional people jumping from branch to branch like this, and there was that movement as well that many former libertarians were becoming Catholic fascists or something like it. It was it's always almost as much as I have hope in younger people, man. Sometimes they're so emotional. They jump from a movement to another that I cannot really understand the thinking process. Maybe they didn't understand what they were into before, and when they became frustrated they try to look for something else, but many times that's cope, right? Many libertarians who stayed keep repeating this, oh, former libertarians are just people who never understood libertarianism, and that's the kind of arrogance that made the movement grow smaller and smaller. Sorry, Emerald, can go ahead.
No, I was going to mention that. Well, I I came into contact with libertarianism a bit before you too, right? It
Right.
was in 2013 or something. And the same disillusionment that you guys are talking about, I've seen it happen also way before. But it wasn't for Catholic traditionalism or things like that. It was much worse. It was for Duganist shit. And I'm talking about 2015, 16. Many people who basically, um, it's like they forgot completely their libertarian point of view. So I don't think they took seriously things from the beginning, which wasn't my case. I would never like defend something that I don't quite understand. But a lot of these radical movements also have the appeal, like the drug example Zizek makes, of being the most radical, being the most different. Oh, this looks like obscure knowledge that people shouldn't know, like the plebs shouldn't know. I'm initiated into the dark secrets of of human knowledge. It's very Gnostic when I think about it. And in libertarians, like actual libertarians who didn't renegade their libertarian influences, I think most of them went for a more NRX route. But I don't see the same thing happening with them. I think they're more honest about their views, which is not the case with the first group that I mentioned. I was very pissed when that happened. Actually, I became very anti-Russia during those days. Well, not that I'm pro-Russia now, but you understand what I
That
mean.
That's interesting because I thought the shift towards Duginism was a much more recent thing. Because maybe I'm looking more about the American libertarians. They were started paying more attention to Duginist thing stuff after the Ukraine war. Maybe a little bit earlier. I think most of it started with that interview. There was a time where Lauren Southern and what's her name,
Brittany
Bridget.
Venti.
No, not Brittany Venti.
I hate that girl.
Her other friend. I think it is Bridget Pettibone, which is married now to an Austrian guy who's pretty into 40p. They had an interview with Dugin out of nowhere. I think that was the introduction for an of his ideas to an American audience, if I'm not mistaken, to most of the American audience. But going back to your point, I'm surprised that back in 2015, libertarians are moving to fourth political theory stuff. I believe that many of the people uh, getting into Duginist stuff were former Olavians, former followers of Olavo de Carvalho. So it was that's new information.
Well, they were everything, right? But that's kind of the idea of fourth political theory. It's basically everyone against libertarian, oh, against liberalism. So it's, well, it doesn't really matter where you came from. But I can give you a very specific example. There was a metal, like music, the music genre, right? Like black metal community or something. I don't know. I don't know much about metal music. Um, and it was called Inner Circle. This name just gives circle jerk vibes already. But many of these guys were reading Dugin, and I actually know these stories because I know personally someone who was in such a group and has gone through his more Duginist phase. Maybe still is. I don't know. I don't really care, to be honest. But yeah, these things are kind of old here in Brazil, and I think much of the incentive they had was to be a non-gay version of leftism, because as we said in the previous episodes, this modern progressive aesthetic is something very recent here in Brazil. Like it's not the syndicalists who are pro-gay, or who were pro-gay, who had the pro-gay initiative, and trying not to be right wing, but or liberal, whatever you, if you want to use their term. Trying not to be liberal, they would basically, um, while also rejecting this aesthetic, this very progressive aesthetic, they would go to in that direction. I think that's the origin of the Duganists here in Brazil.
Got it. Yeah. What else I can comment about?
Well, I there's something before the libertarian movement in Brazil was actually something real, concrete. There was just a very minor liberal movement here. And yes, many figures participated on both. Edu Beltrão kind of participated on both. He had this idea of a starfish. He had the metaphor of a starfish, where different think tanks or institutes would work together, but they could branch off as long as they still worked on the same way. Like when you cut a starfish, what happens? It becomes two starfishes, right? So that was his analogy. And a lot of the liberal and eventually libertarian movement in Brazil followed this. The problem is that it is not organized. People are way too into their own bubbles, and they don't take any sort of action. Even if the autistic libertarians from the internet weren't, from social media, weren't involved with these institutes or think tanks or whatever, they still have the same mentality. So it's basically each one in their own place, never doing anything, like trying to grow very, very slowly, are going to make a change. That's how they think about it. And frankly, it's just wrong. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. COVID is there to refute anyone who has that view. I I don't think how change is going to happen, but if there's something that history tells us is that it comes out of nowhere, right? Every single change comes out of nowhere.
True, Berlin Wall style.
Yes, slowly then suddenly. So I really don't know. Now we have the ones that annoy me the most nowadays are the Bitcoin guys because you clearly see that it's an act of faith. So I don't think anything good is coming from there. But other than that, I don't have like a general opinion.
Yeah, Bitcoin maximalism is pure and simple. There's no way around it. I
No,
I truly
Bitcoin is
hate,
their god,
yeah,
unironically.
I truly hate those guys because I'm a tech guy mostly. I liked reading about I like watching explanations about I like watching explanations about crypto and stuff, and all that approach to the issue, all the technological approach to the issue, basically vanished in the Bitcoin community to give place to slogans and scratch phrases. That's why nowadays I mostly follow Ethereum because they actually have developers debating stuff. So not financial advice, but I like the project from a development perspective. Something else, one thing that I was thinking about here is the issue I see. I'm trying to make a parallel because between the issue I see with the Ron Paul revolution and what happened in Brazil. Because as amazing as it was, I'm of the idea that the Ron Paul revolution created a huge bunch of idiots, a huge bunch of morons. Because okay, you get Ron Paul applying his libertarian principles to to condemn the Federal Reserve and the American foreign policy, and that's justified at least to some extent. But then he convinces a lot of people that that's the problem, and because people are many people are idiots and cannot hold multiple ideas in their minds, they need to reduce to a single principle or a small set of principles. Instead of seeing, oh, he's taking those principles here and applying this to those particular cases in the American context, they actually ended up understanding that, oh, libertarianism is being anti-Federal Reserve and anti-American interventionism. So it's America bad ideology. I wonder if that the same happened in Brazil because as we have discussed here, most of it has stemmed from anti-workers party and the things that are associated with them, and ended up being the core of the libertarian quote unquote movement is opposition to this small set of uh, superficial stuff. Oh, it's just being anti-Texas. Oh, it's just being anti-workers party. Oh, it's just being anti, I don't know. Nowadays we're importing even more. Now it's being anti-Israel, it's being anti uh, anything that America associates with in a positive manner. So to the point that we you get not only Bitcoiners but many quote unquote libertarians giving a lot of credits to traditional communist parties. We all know the catchphrase, right? I can't stand agreeing with PCO anymore. PCO is one of their more uh, traditional communist party, syndicalist party here.
Operary cause party, right?
That's true.
You know what this reminds me of? I remember this vividly because it was such a funny idea. There was a case in the Brazilian libertarian movement where a guy was going to get a job, I think, if I remember correctly. But he was going to get a job on the state, working as a state contractor. And you know what he did? he sent an email to Hans Hermann Hoppe to ask, should I take the job? And Hoppe's like, yeah, sure, just get your job. So, so I think a lot of
Hop
what you
is not
talk,
a real libertarian, dude.
yeah. So a lot of what happened, as you mentioned, Ron Paul, is that people get so attached to the superficial reading of these authors that they get paralyzed at the moment they need to take a decision. So what I saw a lot on this matter was on the matter of what should we do if we get state power or political power. Uh, a lot of purists would say you shouldn't do nothing because the state is evil and you shouldn't partake on it. It's almost like a demon. You shouldn't interact with it. So I remember when Bolsonaro finally got into power after a very vivid and emotional election. Uh, a, a, a lot of libertarians thought, we are anti-state. We know what we should do. What would be a productive use of our time? We should be in opposition to Bolsonaro. That's gotta show that we are anti-state. We are not playing favorites. We are against both sides. So libertarians kind of managed to get into a lot of those anti-productive behaviors precisely because they can't think. They can't think, period. They just rely on these formulas which pretty quickly break once you start interacting with reality.
I think that one of the things who had vaccinated me, who had immunized me to some extent to that kind of reasoning, was that before being a libertarian was I was very into the Olavo de Carvalho stuff, and he has a quote, actually a Facebook post, because he used Facebook a lot, like like the boomer he was. Uh,
Olavo's Facebook is like Trump's Twitter.
yeah, it's amazing. Rest in peace. Uh, when he was mentioning Hans Hoppe, it was on the very few mentions of Hans Hermann Hoppe that he made. And he would say his argument in democracy is irrefutable. But, however, you should take his idea of the natural order being superior to monarchy and monarchy being superior to the democracy as a reference to understand what is better and worse. Not necessarily, that's not exactly his words, but it was not necessarily as a goal, but you take this as a reference for judging political action. I think that's a reasonable approach, and at that time I disagreed, but nowadays I find myself agreeing with him more and more, even about things that I disagreed in the past. It seems good. You have, okay, what kind of political actions could get us closer to what is natural, what is the natural order as we understand in a right wing worldview in that case. And then you judge the actions based on that. But people take this idea of natural order and think this can be established, or not necessarily established, but we destroy everything and then natural order will rise. Well, theoretically, yes, but there's a lot of bodies in the way, and maybe that's not the most virtuous way to go about. Even the virtuous the Aristotelian virtuous ethics versus the ontological Kantian ethics is a thing that shapes our approach to it. And as many people were looking at Kantian stuff, uh, I think that also influenced them, even if they don't know it. So they wanted the correct answer for yesterday, as we say here, and not they were not looking into the most virtuous path to reach the solution.
I vaguely remember Olavo mentioning democracy, the god that fails, and I think it was the same post
Yeah, it's
where
the
his
only post about it.
yeah, and that's kind of the same take that Yarvin has on the book. It was the book that opened his eyes in a way for the limits of libertarian ideology in general, because he was a follower of Mises before, right? But that book was the Trojan Horse, I think he calls it.
Can
And
I bring the quote here because I have it saved?
oh, sure.
I'll try to translate it uh, just in time. The argument, the Hans Hermann Hoppe argument in Democracy, the God That Failed, is refutable, but shows the following problem. Either the natural order has to be established by a world revolution, a global revolution that will concentrate more power than any other previous revolution, uh, generating then no natural order at all, or will stay as an uh, unity of theoretical comparison to guide uh, how do I say that, uh, specific fights, specific disputes that, as has happened with libertarian initiatives, uh, like in Virginia, can give positive results. No, can man, I'm lost here. But basically saying, he was comparing this with libertarian initiatives that end up with results that oppose the desired, with the opposite of the desired results, uh, because there is no common measure between ideal society and practical politics. That maybe I butchered this, but I think you get the idea. So this idea of natural order, the concept of natural order, uh, the formulation of it, the identification of it as this parameter to judge political action, I think is the most sensible approach to the issue, and not as a model to establish disorder out of nowhere.
Absolutely, and I agree. And the problem with much of the libertarian interpretation of the Hoppian argument is something that Hermit talked about. That for example, we got the argumentation ethics model. Now we don't have to think about it anymore. And I I like this example in particular because I think argumentation ethics is stupid. But
You know
um,
what? It's I think it ended up being pretty pedantic in the mouths of many people, because I can call myself to some extent a Rothbardian, and I think the Rothbardian argument for this ethical system was way more uh, explainable. Is what
it's way more sensible.
Yes,
Argumentation ethics is based on something that doesn't exist. Like, okay, the fact that I'm debating with you doesn't prove anything. It just proves that I don't want to go to jail or something. If I could, I would just submit you
you
to
can
my
you can
desires.
you can say it's more compact and makes sense in the context of the is ought debate and so on. But for the common people, that's not an appropriate argument, and people are trying to use it to talk to everybody. I think Rothbardian argument is way more common sense, is way more digestible, but people rejected it because, oh, we learned here. There was that phase where people were trying to cancel Rothbard here. But, oh, he has been surpassed by Hoppe. We can't use his argument anymore, and people gave up an awesome tool to explain stuff because of this hubris, even to always only get the bleeding edge stuff.
It's also something else. Libertarians, it's the autistic thing again. Libertarians do not think of real life, how to do things in real life. They make the most, frankly, beautiful models in their heads, but they don't know how to get there. And that's what they should be learning from people like Millet, for example. But from what I see, what the most they could do was copy the aesthetics, like Cogos cutting his hair, just like Millet's. That's it. That's all the Brazilians learned
Yeah.
from Millet.
Yeah, talking about Cogos, I think there's another issue, which is a nominalistic fallacy. I think that's the proper term in English. Uh, that people get too attached to the labels, the public and private thing. Those things do not really exist. If you're feeling the ironic thing is people ended up thinking like communists when they think that this private stuff is completely artificial, and there's a clear distinction about the public and the private. The only difference between some kind of libertarian communists is which one they think is real. But to my in my understanding, those are basically the same. There are only private actions even inside the government. There's when you look at a policeman stopping a crime, stopping a robbery, he he is privately doing something good, and you cannot just, oh, but he's in the public sphere, therefore his action is bad. There's always this nominalistic issue with many libertarians that they get too attached to the label, and they do not understand that even in a regulated market, there's some actions. There are a certain level of human action. There's some level of uh, free action there. You cannot have a 100% regulated life. There's always this component of genuine individual initiative, and they stop looking at it. They just look, oh, there's a little bit of taint here, therefore that's all wrong. It's the one drop rule of statism somehow. It, I see a lot of this. They cannot uh, navigate an imperfect world.
There's no strategy, basically.
Not just strategy, but the ability to deal with degrees of stuff. Once again, Olavo has immunized me to some extent to that stuff with his book about the four discourses, right? The Aristotle from a new perspective, and I see that every pursuit of truth has levels to the credibility, to this credibility, right? We cannot learn everything in a 100% apodictical way. Many times have content ourselves with partial knowledge, and I think that applies as well to recognizing the degrees of private and public, so to speak, participation and stuff. And people cannot understand this. They can only see a binary choice, and that uh, makes them freeze. That makes them freeze when out actually having to choose something, actually having to have some action.
It's interesting that you point that out because if they were, there are some authors that make have a certain role in American libertarianism that there is no, they don't have an equivalent here in Brazil. And I mentioned one of them, Ayn Rand, that I think, well, it's needed. Someone to have her role is needed. Not her personality, maybe, but her role is needed. And the other one is Thomas Sowell because he has the great idea of the, he has this quote about trade-offs. There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, right? So if you have a goal in mind, be it to nudge the Brazilian direction a little bit towards libertarianism, you are going to deal with the greasy parts that you mentioned. There's no way around it. You can't have like the you can be the Puritan libertarian, the purist libertarian. Sorry, um, if you want to actually make a change, and this idea that sometimes you have two bad choices, libertarians do not understand at all.
Choosing the least of two evils is evil.
Exactly, like Hermit mentioned before the how they started to attack Bolsonaro in the when he was elected, right? Like in real life, no one cares about your consistency. No one cares. People just care if they're paying more taxes or less taxes, or if they're, with things that actually deal with their day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and as much as I don't like it, look, I don't like the fact that most people don't care, but I also want to survive. In the end, you have to, if those things, if those ideas are important to you, you have to find a way to survive and perpetuate them and build something. I think it was is Harry Brown that says, if you want to be heard, you have to be a successful person. Nobody here's nobody. So your main concern is not to rely exclusively in the absolute truth of the things you're saying, but on being a person that people can look up to. And most people don't want to do that because
Exactly.
that is buying into the system and not being as subversive as they want to be. They idolize this bottom mentality, this this aesthetic of defeat.
Exactly. And that's why I mentioned that Brazil misses someone like Thomas Sowell, because he was kind of a popular writer in many ways. Not like as far as someone in his position can be, right? And he would tackle very mundane things and how to, you know, be a how be functional having your ideas, how your ideas act in practice, how like in basic economics, how does your views in economics work in real life? And that's something that is missing a lot in the Brazilian movement, because it becomes so abstract, so based on ideas that it bears no resemblance to the actual world. So the only thing that is left for them is to, you know, get into autistic niches online, and they become radicalized, like we said in the Fuentes episode, and they're always trying to be the most blank there is, and someone else who is a little less is just a moderate, etc., etc. Like, where's the connection with real life?
That's true. And now that frustration with the movement, now getting into the final part, I guess, all the frustration with the movement makes me wonder um, how this will end up. Because when you look at the more younger people, we see them trending more toward more radical ideas, and that's a point where kind of empirically confirms me that libertarianism is not the extreme right, as many people try to believe. Oh, there's this scale of less liberty and more liberty, which is a bit silly. For me, the extreme right would be something more akin to aristocracy and the idea that everybody has its own place. But we see many people trending either towards uh, explicit communism, because many of our communists have dropped the pretense of being democratic and so on, or being, I don't know, social democrats, or the extreme right, the NRX, as you mentioned. So, what do you guys see? The future debates will be between progressively more radical ideas, or is there any tendency of rebirth to those more classical liberal or libertarian ones?
To me, it's pretty clear that libertarianism, as it was formulated up to this point, has no future unless it is part of a synthesis. And I think that Nick Land and Curtis Yarvin managed to do a good synthesis with New Reaction or Dark Enlightenment. And I see a lot of future in it. But I also see a lot of room for more interpretations of mainly Hoppe and Rothbard to re-emerge on the future. And of course, they're going to have to incorporate a lot of the stuff that has happened in the last couple of years. Certainly, trying to copy paste 2016 libertarianism to 2026 is not going to end well. So I think there is room there. At the moment, I think there's a pretty clear trend towards authoritarianism, and the viewer be the judge if he thinks it's a good thing or not. Libertarianism is not trending at the moment, maybe for good reason. And my opinion, for whatever worth it is that probably Nick Land got it right when he said that liberalism is an Anglo-Saxon phenomena, and I think there is going to be certain groups of people and certain societies where libertarian ideas are going to be more acceptable than places where people probably shouldn't even try to make libertarianism work. And I don't think uh, India or Tibet or Pakistan is turning libertarian anytime soon, but maybe a future racially homogeneous succession state in New England might be. So yeah, that's my perspectives for the future.
Emerald, something?
I don't like I don't I'm terrible with predictions and perspectives for future and things like that. But I agree that there is this shift towards authoritarianism, but I am of the view that authoritarianism isn't necessarily against liberty. I mean, if you have the right words, if you have the right populist, things can go either south or not. But of course, it's very dangerous. And although you gave some very good examples, Hermit, there's also cases such as El Salvador, as they say in English, sorry, or Singapore, or even Argentina, which um, are very odd. But there's also something. All of them had one very big leader that shifted their respective countries towards a more positive, uh, a more positive direction, right? Of course, and positive by my perspective, and I think it's the correct perspective is something more that accepts liberty, uh, more, you know, regardless. Um, in the case of Brazil specifically, I don't know. Again, I don't like predictions. Maybe something happened suddenly. I mean, is there any doubt that if Lula dies tomorrow, the left is basically going to eat itself just like the right does? I don't see a leader in the left other than Lula. So, and he's not getting any younger. Um, I really, I don't know. I don't see the left getting stronger. Just like I just see the right getting weaker. What does that mean? I'm not really sure.
True. On my part, um Hermit mentioned the synthesis. I have this. I'd like to be able to do this new reading of Rothbardian and Hopian material in a way that could keep the more civilizational aspects of what they say. I mean, when you look Efficacy of Liberty, you say, oh, every time you consume something, you need to produce it first. That's side law, but uh, there 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 are there are ideas like these which are pretty simple and work as a sanity check for more complex ones. If your ideology is violating this, you're probably on the wrong direction. I think there are those insights which are very I really keep them and I like to use them as a sanity check for more complex ideas. Uh, but I really want to give them a spin of uh, a more macro spin because Rothbard is pretty they look pretty much at the micro stuff. Oh, taking an apple and producing a I don't know any particular good and so on. But we need to look more at the macro stuff because even if you have a society that accepts those ideas, it's surrounded by people who do not. And I think he was getting into it in his later years with articles like Nations by Consent. He was starting to recognize that how, for instance, Russia was using migration as a weapon against other peoples. He was more positive towards the Soviet Union in his earlier years, saying it was more peaceful than the US and so on. I don't really blame him at the time, but nowadays, in hindsight, you can see that wasn't the best interpretation. So something that mixed that a synthesis between the sanity check parts of libertarianism and something that answer more macro questions, questions regarding identity and even uh, meaning in a sense, deeper meaning in a sense to people's lives would be a good thing. Uh, that's something I intend to to sell more to people, but I fear being out of touch of Brazilian reality. Yeah, as you guys said, maybe that's an Anglo-Saxon thing. Maybe you'll never be compatible with the Brazilian psyche, but I think it's worth a try.
Well, you mentioned Rothbard, and there's also something else. He was not afraid of making mistakes along the way. You mentioned that he said that the USSR was more peaceful than the US, or that I can add another. He he praised Che Guevara, right?
True.
He did. It was a mistake, but his only goal when he worked with the New Left, when he worked with Buchanan, his only goal was to spread the idea of liberty, to work against the only evil in his view, the state. That was it. He was not afraid of, getting his hands dirty. And if the Brazilian libertarian movement gets too rigid, too concerned with the purity, or or things like that, it's just going to get paralyzed and it's going to do nothing. Because guess what? These debates happen throughout history. They happen throughout time. It's just something that goes on and on. You're not going to find the solution forever and ever here. It's not going to happen.
Something else that I'm thinking about that to some extent makes we be more purists, but in a way that we gatekeep better. It's having a lot more care with words. We have mentioned authoritarianism, right, as this group of ideologies would tend more towards, I don't know, government and so on. But even that is an issue because authority could be something good. When you're mentioning something that abuses power, it would be preferable to use a term that maybe the Greeks would call tyranny, right? We can have an authoritarian monarchical regime, which is good because the king has actual authority. He's not a tyrant. Even the matter of liberty. Oh, we have to promote liberty. Maybe not as a principle. Because when we focus on liberty, we take this liberty as a principle, we end up attracting a lot of degenerates, for the lack of a better word, people who really want to do what they want without caring for the consequences, even particular consequences or even societal consequences or civilizational consequences. I think the the way you can give a proper spin, and here I'm talking about from a self-proclaimed right-wing perspective, it's focusing on the more civilizational aspects of and law civilizational and law aspects of libertarianism in a way that turns leftists off, that makes them look at this, oh, I don't want this. I think that's and also praising authority, true authority, things which are the top at the top of natural hierarchies that will always appear. Let's say, as you have mentioned, the places we see as good examples of things improving is where you have a leader, where you have someone that uh, gets the the confidence of people, right? Even if they're not libertarian, maybe they're improving this in some way. There's a very hardcore ANCAP that with Danny Duchamp. I follow him on X, formerly known as Twitter, that he said, even he said, well, the crime is so bad for an economy that even an almost dictator like Bukele is improving the economy just by jailing criminals. So even that's super important, right? And that's something that if we go for if we talk too much about liberty and attract those leftist subversives, this will never be done because oh we can't use the state apparatus to repress those people. You can see you see even some agorists in Brazil praising drug traffickers because they're against the state, they're fighting against the state. This is the kind of people we have to turn off. We have to gatekeep, and we do this, a lot of this by language, by being very careful with the words we choose.
Well, I wouldn't say we because I don't consider myself a libertarian.
Yeah,
But
I
I'm being
mean
petty. I'm
people.
being petty.
I mean, not
Uh,
necessarily libertarians, but people trying to salvage the good part of those ideas. Maybe in a new movement, who knows?
yes, yes. But this thing that you mentioned that even the agorists were, defending uh drug traffickers who are very violent. They're basically, the whole world was seeing what was happening in Rio de Janeiro a while back. The whole world. Come on. But there's also something that we barely touched upon, but there was the libertarian movement in Brazil gathered a lot of nihilists. They basically had no vision of morality or, you know, oh, just don't mess with my stuff and it's fine. You know, just get off my lawn and it's fine. And it doesn't matter that I'm cooking meth in my trailer or something. And again, I think this ties a little bit to what I said that some key figures that the Americans had, we never did. And I mean, it's impossible for a libertarian in America to read The Fountainhead and get the idea that libertarianism is being hedonistic. It's impossible. But it's very possible for a Brazilian to get in contact with libertarian ideas and think that's the point, or that it's good, or that it doesn't matter that you're hedonistic, you know?
True. Yeah, there's a lot of cultural work that has to be done. Maybe it was a really how can I say, the order of things in the development of a libertarian movement in Brazil, so to speak, wasn't the proper order. We went straight for the intellectual stuff, and that's not how we do things. That's not how things have to be done. Well, anyways, we have gone past 2 hours, so I think we need to wrap things up here. So again, I think that was a very productive episode. I really enjoyed. I'm sorry if I talked too much here. Maybe I was too talkative in this episode. I wasn't. I, I wasn't letting you guys say too much, but I'll leave it open to you guys if you need to give some final considerations.
I'll try to be quick, but I thought that I was talking too much.
I think we
um,
both we both were
yeah,
silencing Hermit too much.
yeah, I'm sorry, Hermit, but I'm really sorry. But this topic is something that fascinates me a little bit because I saw a lot of it, and I probably should have organized better my ideas and made a little checklist of things to 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 mention because I'm sure there's many things that I will remember when I go to bed. Um, but if we ever get in a topic that is tangent to this, I will probably um, have one or two more anecdotes about this god awful movement that is Brazilian libertarianism.
I'm pretty sure we'll do an episode on the Bolsonaro phenomenon in little time, so it's
Uh,
related.
Yeah, it is absolutely. And well, other than that, use Matrix, everyone. Use Matrix. It's not as convoluted as it sounds.
Well, I want to thank you guys again for inviting me and for having me. You guys don't have to apologize for talking too much. In truth, I talked the most last episode because it was a subject which was dear to me, and the current subject, you guys probably have a lot. You guys definitely do have a lot more to talk about than me, so it is only natural. I just want to wrap up to say that this was a good episode. It was a great retrospective. I think there's a lot to learn from the mistakes which all of us have made during our libertarian phase, and which we have learned and are carrying on forward with this experience in mind. And I think that if these ideas can be repackaged and reformulated under more careful consideration, like it was proven to be able to do under people like Yarvin and Nick Land and even Hoppe himself, there is probably still hope for it in the future.
All right. So once again, thanks you two a lot for your contributions to this episode. I also want to thank everyone who is watching this, who has watching this to the end, has watched this to the end. Your viewership is very much appreciated. So yeah, that's it. Until next time, guys.